Grace Bennett was a part-time teacher's aide who had spent most of her adult life trying to make ends meet. As early winter settled in, the chill seemed to creep not only into her worn-out shoes but also into her budget. Even working long hours at Jefferson Elementary School, Grace found herself pinching pennies to pay for rent and groceries on her meager salary. She'd often skip meals just to ensure her daughter, Emily Bennett, never went to bed hungry. Grace's values were stitched into her gentle acts of kindness. She often stayed late at the Shelter of Hope, where she volunteered when her days at school ended. Her heart overflowed with compassion, making her known for comforting those in need, despite having so little herself. That particular evening, the Shelter of Hope hummed with the typical sounds of families settling in for the night. With early winter's dark cloak settling over the city, the shelter bustled with too many people escaping the biting wind and not enough space to hold them all. Grace was preparing to leave when she noticed a new family huddled in the corner. Parents with two young children who looked just as weary as their well-worn clothes suggested. The shelter coordinator, David Woods, tried his best to find accommodations. As he approached Grace, a look of despair evident on his face, she knew that the shelter's beds were filled to capacity. "Grace Bennett, could you possibly stay a little longer tonight?" David Woods asked, his voice carrying the weight of his own struggles. The Whitaker family just arrived, and were struggling to find them a spot. It was the kindness in her soul that made Grace nod without hesitation. "Of course. Let's see what we can do." Her mind raced through possibilities while she led the family James Whitaker, Mary Whitaker, and their children, Tommy Whitaker and Lily Whitaker, toward a quieter corner of the large room. As the evening wore on, Grace sat with the Whitaker family, engaging them in conversation. Little by little, she discovered their worries and offered a listening ear, knowing dearly how vital it was to have someone who cared. Mary Whitaker shared her concerns about the children missing school, while James Whitaker worried about finding work again. Grace resonated deeply with their troubles, acknowledging the common threads between their lives. They talked about education, opportunities, and those dreams that seemed just a bit too far out of reach. "Education is the key," Grace said gently, thinking of her own daughter back home, likely studying as she spoke. "That's why I work with kids at school. It's important they have hope for the future." Together, they found temporary solutions. Grace reached out to someone she knew who was occasionally able to open his small business storage space for overflow shelter purposes. Conveniently, he was willing to help the Whitaker family find a warm spot for the night. By the time most families at the Shelter of Hope settled in for sleep, Grace was still there. She wanted to make sure the Whitaker family was comfortable and knew where to turn when morning came. The night stretched on, her heartache softening as she saw Lily Whitaker and Tommy Whitaker curl into their borrowed sleeping bags. Grace felt a lightness replace her worries, the kindness of the act warming her as winter winds howled outside. As the clock ticked past, Grace was reminded of her own financial hardship. Each minute spent at the shelter meant another minute she wasn't home with Emily Bennett, ensuring the heater was working and school clothes were ready for another day. But the connection she forged with the Whitaker family was a testament to the selflessness that defined her core. Despite knowing she'd wake up to the same financial struggles, Grace Bennett found herself returning home later that night, hopeful and inspired. It was a night of giving that seemed simple enough, but Grace, guided by her open heart, had no idea how this very act of kindness would change the course of her life. The universe often rewards those who seek nothing in return, and what lay ahead for Grace Bennett would be something beyond even her generous imagination. Sarah Jenkins locked the door to her tiny apartment and walked briskly down the dimly lit street, clutching her coat tightly against the biting cold. She knew she should have been at home with a hot cup of tea, preparing for another shift at the Cozy Cup the next morning, but her heart pulled her once more in the direction of the Hope Community Shelter. Her thoughts lingered on the Whitaker family she had helped the previous evening. The warmth she felt from assisting them had lingered through the night, and Sarah found herself eager to see if they were doing all right. The morning air was crisp with a hint of sunrise promising a new day, and as Sarah entered the shelter, she was greeted with the familiar aroma of oatmeal and weak coffee, a comforting combination that signified the start of many days here. She found James Whitaker sitting at one of the tables, his face a little less burdened, as he played a game of tic-tac-toe with Tommy Whitaker, who grinned up at him triumphantly. "Good morning," Sarah Jenkins Mary Whitaker waved with Lily Whitaker in tow, the little girl yawning widely yet smiling, a hopeful expression on her face. "Good morning, Mary Whitaker. How are you and your family today?" Sarah asked, her voice warm with genuine concern. We're better. Thank you, Mary Whitaker replied, her gratitude evident. James managed to speak to someone about a few job leads. It's not much, but it's a start. Sarah felt a surge of relief and joy. Part of her an ever-present part worried about what the future held, both for herself and those she cared for. But seeing the Whitaker family take a step forward like this filled her heart with hope. As the families at the shelter went about their morning routines, Sarah and Mary shared a quiet conversation. They spoke of their shared struggles with finance and the dreams they held for their children's futures. Mary shared stories from her past, explaining how she and James used to run a small tailoring business before circumstances pushed them out of their home. It was a world away from Sarah's experiences, yet familiar in the way hardships have a universal language. For the first time in a while, Sarah spoke about her own struggles, how her job at the Cozy Cup didn't always make ends meet, and yet how volunteering gave her a sense of purpose that filled the gaps money couldn't. This mutual understanding strengthened the bond between them. As morning turned to early afternoon, Grace Bennett, the teacher's aide from the night before, returned to the shelter. Grace Bennett carried an envelope with her, a sign of her personal investment in the families she helped. "Grace, there's an envelope here for you," David Woods called, catching Grace as she shepherded Emily Bennett towards the exit. Emily Bennett held their coats and a small lunchbox, her presence a constant reminder to Grace Bennett of what it meant to keep going. The envelope in question had been carefully tucked away, waiting in the small office tucked in the corner of the shelter. Curiosity piqued, Grace Bennett opened it carefully and was stunned to find a small donation from a community member anonymously, along with an offer for a trial position as a teaching assistant at a nearby school, more stable hours and slightly better pay. Surprise flickered across Grace Bennett's face before she dissolved into gratitude, a feeling that only those who give without expecting anything in return can truly savor. She shared her news with Sarah Jenkins, who beamed with pride at her friend's fortuitous turn of events. "See? Sometimes good things do happen to good people," Sarah Jenkins said, squeezing Grace Bennett's hand. This small but meaningful change in Grace Bennett's life was as much a victory for Sarah Jenkins and her altruistic spirit as it was for Grace herself. They lived in a world where hardships often overshadowed dreams, but in moments like these, the light seemed to glimmer just a little brighter. "Let's celebrate with some pie from the Cozy Cup later," Sarah Jenkins suggested, knowing that a slice of their best apple pie was always a welcome treat. "With extra whipped cream," Grace Bennett added, her spirits lifting, buoyed by this glimmer of hope. The day played on, with Sarah Jenkins spending a few more hours at the shelter, assisting wherever she could. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, she and Grace Bennett resolved to meet up for their promised pie, marking the small victories they had achieved that day. As they walked back to their neighborhood, Emily Bennett skipping along the sidewalk and Lily Whitaker clutching Mary Whitaker's hand beside them, the group felt a renewed sense of camaraderie. Through their conversations, hope bloomed, and with it came the promise of a better tomorrow. It was these small connections, the unseen threads that tied them together, which solidified Sarah Jenkins' belief in kindness. Though paths might differ and their individual struggles might continue, they understood that together, they could lift each other up. As they reached the Cozy Cup, the lights warm and inviting, the pies ready to be served, Sarah Jenkins knew that the cycle of kindness and hope they unwittingly promised to continue had already begun its ripple effect, weaving lightly through each of their lives. As they sat together at the Cozy Cup, the shared warmth of friendship and pie made the small cafe feel like a haven from the outside cold. The apple pie, with its flaky crust and touch of cinnamon, was a simple indulgence, but for Sarah Jenkins, Grace Bennett, Mary Whitaker, and their children, it symbolized much more. It represented small triumphs, the threads of connection weaving through their lives. As evening fell, laughter and the chatter of conversation filled the space. Emily Bennett and Lily Whitaker, the two children, sat side by side, giggling over shared stories and scribbling drawings on napkins. Grace Bennett and Mary Whitaker exchanged heartfelt reminiscences about their hopes for their children, while Sarah Jenkins listened, her heart full of quiet contentment. After they finished their slices of pie, Sarah Jenkins noticed a man at the counter speaking with the cafe's owner, M.S. Collins. She recognized this man as Robert Callahan, the gentleman who had offered his storage place to the Whitaker family. It had been a generous offer at a crucial time, providing the family with much-needed warmth. Curiosity piqued, Sarah Jenkins listened as Robert Callahan approached their table, his eyes bright with goodwill. I just wanted to check on how everything turned out for your family, he said to Mary Whittaker, a hopeful note in his voice. Mary Whittaker smiled gratefully. We're getting through, thanks to people like you, Mr. Callahan. Everyone's been so kind. As Robert Callahan nodded, he added, kindness creates a cycle. And speaking of kindness, Sarah Jenkins, I've heard a lot about you. Ms. Collins was just telling me about your work at the community. I understand you went out of your way for the Whittakers. Sarah Jenkins shrugged modestly, her cheeks flushing slightly. Oh, it's nothing really. I just did what anyone else would have done. Well, Robert Callahan said, his tone serious but his eyes sparkling with determination, I've recently come into a bit of extra funding, and I've been searching for ways to make a positive impact. I'd like to offer you something as a thank you. Daniel Collins stepped into the conversation with a nod of affirmation. It seems, Sarah Jenkins, you truly have a knack for turning kindness into action. Perhaps this is meant for you. Sarah Jenkins felt a flutter of surprise as Robert Callahan produced a check from his pocket. His handwriting was neat and his signature bold, the amount clear as day $1,500. It was more money than she'd seen in one place for quite some time, and certainly more than she earned in tips and wages at the Cozy Cup in a month. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted his gesture, overwhelmed by the depths of generosity she was witnessing. I don't know what to say, she murmured, humbled by this unexpected turn of events. Robert Callahan smiled warmly. Say you'll keep spreading that kindness. I see the difference you make around here, and I want to be part of that. The group buzzed with shared joy. Grace Bennett clasped Sarah Jenkins' hand, her own thankful expression mirroring the gratitude that hung thickly in the air. Mary Whittaker's eyes glistened with tears, touched by this ripple effect of goodness that continued to expand around them. As the evening carried on, the enveloping atmosphere of the Cozy Cup seemed to grow brighter, the lines between friends and family blurring into a community of caring hearts. With each bite of pie, each shared story, the power of their collective kindness painted a picture of resilience that none of them would soon forget. In the following days, the ripple effects of this financial blessing spread throughout Sarah Jenkins' life. It allowed her the freedom to breathe a little easier, to settle some bills that had piled up. She was also able to save a bit more for future goals. Moreover, knowing that her actions had brought about such positive change fueled her motivation to do more both at the shelter and beyond its walls. Grace Bennett, buoyed by the newfound job offer she had received earlier, felt more hopeful than she had in years. She put some of her earnings toward a night class in early childhood education, a dream she'd held close but never thought attainable. Meanwhile, Mary Whittaker and James Whittaker began to rebuild their tailoring business, initially from a small corner of the space granted by Robert Callahan. They found hope in the future, their determination to provide for their children burning brighter than ever. Through it all, the bond between Sarah Jenkins, Grace Bennett, and the Whittaker family grew stronger, bound together by the shared experiences and the kindness that had lifted them all. The story of that winter evening became a cherished memory of how a simple act could transform lives beyond that single moment, a lesson they would carry with them into every winter yet to come. And so, wrapped in the comfort of their renewed friendships, they ventured onward, hopeful and assured that kindness, much like the chill of early winter, had a way of creeping into every corner of their lives. As the group relished in the warmth of the Cozy Cup, the chatter of conversation and laughter echoing softly around them, Sarah Jenkins found herself soaking in the happiness that lingered like an embrace. It was remarkable to think how a simple choice had set such events in motion, drawing her close to people who now felt like family. As evening melted into night, the comforting hum of connections made her reflect on all that had happened. Emily Bennett and Lily Whittaker stayed connected by a shared game of hopscotch on the fading tiles while their mothers, Grace Bennett and Mary Whittaker, chatted about future plans across the delicate table. Sarah Jenkins was pulled out of her reverie by the familiar voice of Ms. Collins carrying over from the counter. Hearing hints of gratitude aimed her way, Sarah turned to find Robert Callahan sharing a final few words with the cafe owner before stepping out into the chilly night. Ms. Collins approached their table, her gaze warm and approving. Sarah Jenkins, you do have a way of drawing good people together. Sarah blushed, glancing around the cafe at her newfound circle. Sometimes it's just about being in the right place at the right time, she said. But deep down, she knew that it was more than chance, it was the kindness she had chosen to share, which bound them beneath the Cozy Cup's soft light. As the night unfolded, The group shared tales from their lives, painting vivid pictures of challenges faced and victories earned. Mary Whittaker and James Whittaker spoke with more promise about their revived tailoring business, the determination in their eyes reflecting more than just hope. James Whittaker shared plans for expanding their client base. "We've reached out to a few old connections already. It feels like we're truly getting back on our feet," he said, a spark of resilience flickering within him. "I'm so happy for both of you. And to think it all started with one little act of kindness," Grace Bennett chimed in, admiration in every syllable as she thought of Sarah Jenkins' impact, both on them and herself. A sense of gratitude washed over Sarah Jenkins, filling her with a newfound understanding of the power she inherently carried. The realization that her simple actions had interwoven each of their lives in such incredible ways was both humbling and empowering. As the lighthearted evening drew toward its end, there was a shared agreement to meet again soon. The conversations, laughter, and companionship they had found in each other was something precious, not to be relinquished easily. Over the following weeks, this ever-growing circle of friends reunited frequently. Meetings were easy to come by: an occasional lunch break at the Shelter of Hope, evenings over cups of coffee at the Cozy Cup, or impromptu strolls through the nearby park when winter's veil lifted enough to reveal slivers of warmth. Each encounter became a cherished moment, infusing their daily lives with strength and renewed resolve. Sarah Jenkins found herself invested deeply in the Whittaker family's endeavors, offering what small assistance she could, whether that meant promoting their tailoring skills to customers at the Cozy Cup or providing childcare for the children while Mary Whittaker and James Whittaker worked. Grace Bennett, too, found herself returning to an old passion: a desire to teach and inspire children with stories, ones that introduced them to the beauty and power of kindness. This grew stronger with each step she took toward credentialing for her early childhood education. As days turned into weeks, a tentative plan began weaving itself into the core of Grace Bennett's aspirations: the possibility of opening a small after-school club where she and Sarah Jenkins could collaborate, really focusing on excited young learners. The dynamic felt as natural as breathing, and as the idea took root, dreams cast long shadows of possibilities. Through all this, Sarah Jenkins' life experienced a serene transformation. She grew not only in heart but also in mind as she navigated her dual roles between the Cozy Cup and Hope Community Shelter. The $1,500 gift card from Robert Callahan had proven invaluable, easing her own financial strain and allowing her to breathe easier. When it came to Sarah Jenkins, the small ripples of kindness kept expanding in ever unexpected, overlapping circles that stretched far past their initial reach. The once daunting weight of life's uncertainties grew lighter with a tapestry of resilience and friendship sewn into its fabric. One chilly afternoon in February, as frosted leaves dared to flutter in the early winter air, the group gathered once more at the shelter, where David Woods had organized their first small volunteer fair. It was an initiative led by Sarah Jenkins and Grace Bennett, designed to showcase available community resources and exemplify how caring, kindness, and shared efforts could make a lasting change. Mary Whittaker secured a small booth for her tailoring business, gathering encouraging feedback from attendees. It was a chance to lay the groundwork for a stable future for her family. As Sarah Jenkins moved through the booths, she stopped now and then to speak with someone she recognized as hopeful eyes lit up in mutual recognition. In one corner of the fair, Mrs. Collins from the Cozy Cup handed out complimentary coffee, greeted by grateful smiles and improbable alliances. Grace Bennett, radiating purpose, led a small story time session for children whose faces lit up with enthusiasm in the midst of her tales. She was sharing lessons woven in images of kindness and unity, lessons that Sarah Jenkins had lived. At the end of the day, as lingering visitors gathered their coats and moved toward the exit, Sarah Jenkins, Grace Bennett, and Mary Whittaker stood together, watching the serene success of their venture unfold before them. "This was a wonderful day," Mary Whittaker said, her expression a blend of accomplishment and pride. "It's incredible to witness all the good that's come simply because one person chose to care." Grace Bennett nodded, a hint of joy in her eyes as Emily Bennett joined them, hand in hand, with Lily Whittaker beside her. "We're building a community, one kind act at a time." Sarah Jenkins took in the sight of the friends who had grown into family. "This is only the beginning. We have the power to change the world, starting right here." The words carried a heavy resonance, reflecting not only the work they'd accomplished but the path forged ahead: a shared dream, intertwined destinies, and the realization that the warmth within their hearts could melt winter's chill. With that, they began extinguishing the lights, closing the evening on yet another chapter, a chapter anchored by the promise ignited by Sarah Jenkins' initial act of kindness and now set aflame by the ongoing unity and relentless hope of those around her. The bonds they had nurtured were no longer just connections, they were a celebration of life itself. And through it all, Sarah Jenkins had learned that kindness didn't just change those it touched, it allowed them all to see the world anew.